Hey guys, this is Pete from Drunken.js, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a simple little 3D hover flip card for your website. And this is going to be done with CSS 3D transforms, and we're going to do it from scratch. So right away we're just going to start with doc type, HTML. This video is for more advanced users, or more advanced web developers, I should say. Flippy vodka. So I'm gonna assume that you are familiar with HTML, CSS, and all that kind of stuff. Not gonna do any JavaScript in this video. Don't need it. Okay, so basic HTML structure, hit save, and Control O, and let's go to flip, and flip. And it's blank, but with the title Flippy Vodka. And you can see I've got two images here that I just grabbed from Google Images of two vodka bottles. And we're gonna put those on the front and back of the playing card that we're gonna animate. So for any 3D transform, you do want to have a container, because we're gonna attach to that a CSS rule called perspective. And when you have a container div that has perspective on it, or any element with perspective on it, you're telling the browser, hey, I want to do some 3D shit in here. So you're gonna have an overriding container. Then we're gonna have a inner container. And then we're gonna have the two sides of our playing card. So I'm actually gonna make a generic side class for both sides. And then I'm gonna have a front. And I'm gonna have a back, side, back. All right, so there's a front and back. I'm gonna start the CSS. I always do a little bit of a reset, a little mini reset. Just give margin 0, padding 0 to everything, just so we don't have to deal with any extra unforeseen padding. I'm gonna center everything in the body just for this, and I'm going to give the content a little room to breathe at the top. I'm going to save. Yeah, I should probably register Sublime, shouldn't I? All right, so let's put some content in here so we can see what we're doing. This is the front, and image source equals, and our first image is absolute JPEG, and we'll be a little more creative here, I guess. Hurry back. And this is gonna be Beluga JPEG. Beluga JPEG. As you see, those are our two images in my folder. And hit save, refresh. This is what I was expecting. So I've got the two divs with the front text and the front image right on top of the back text and the back image. All right, and there's a little bit of padding up top. Everything is centered. Everything looks good. All right, so diving into the weeds of the CSS. So container, if you remember, that's the overriding container. That's the outer container of the whole thing, or just, well, our content anyway, within the body. So as I mentioned before, you want perspective, 800 pixels. Don't worry too much about the value here. I would just recommend just do 800 pixels. It's a good default to go with. As you're playing around with it, perspective will actually tell the browser how deep to draw the 3D distance stuff. So like if something is slightly in the background or slightly farther away from the camera, it'll draw it farther away the higher this value is, and it'll draw it closer to the camera the lower the value is. So it kind of gives a flatter perspective the lower the number is, and a deeper perspective the higher the number is. But 800 pixels is a good starting value. I would just recommend, your first few experiments, just stick with 800 pixels. So yeah, and we're gonna need a dimension on this container height. Width of 200 pixels, height 300 pixels. Good width and height. Refresh. Yeah, everything looks a little weird, which is expected because it's still display block, and text align center doesn't work on display block, so we need display inline block, and that will let the text align center take effect. So now everything's back in the center. Of course, this is all screwed up, but that's because this image is way too big for the div, so it's just blowing up and bleeding out. Let's go ahead and fix the image real quick, and we're gonna say max width, 95% of the available space, max height 80% of the available space. Save, refresh. Okay, now this is a lot more sane, a little more normal. Just for now, I'm gonna attach a border to these guys so you can follow along a little better. Hit save, and you see those are the two sides, and yeah, they look pretty good. So for front, we're actually going to give it a background of linear gradient, and we'll say red, yellow. This is just to fancy it up so it looks a little cooler when we're getting done. This has nothing to do with the 3D part. Background, linear gradient, blue, purple. Save, refresh. I got this color thing going on, which is kind of cool. I can't really read this black text here, so on the back, let me go ahead and give it white text. There we go. Now it's white text. The black text isn't the best, but whatever. It's just an experiment. So, all right. And so those look kind of pretty good. So now we need to actually start with the, well, okay, first things first, these are stacked vertically. What I want to do is I want to have the back sitting right on top of the front, or vice versa, but in this case it's just, it doesn't actually matter which one's on top of which, but I want this actually literally sitting on top of the front, and you'll see why in a little bit. But for now, and if you know CSS, you know that to do that we need position absolute. So for container we don't need to do anything, but for inner container, and if you remember, that's our secondary container. We're actually going to do, let me make this, I'm gonna make sure that the inner container fits the width and height of the container, of the outer container. And I'm also gonna do the same thing for the side. Make sure both of the sides are basically filling up this 200, 300 width and height. So because all these are descendant from that, this has a width of 200, 300, and the inner container and each of these sides will now be width of 100%, height 100%. So they should all be width 200, 300. So that won't have any actual visual impact. Well, I'm sorry, except it will fill out the 300 pix high dimension. So those are looking pretty good. And so now we start with the position absolute. Left 0, top 0. So within this container, then, well, actually this is probably going to be, oh, that's actually correct. Okay. So now you see the front look like it disappeared, but it's actually just hiding behind the back here. And so the next thing I'm going to do is for the inner container, I'm actually going to do its own position absolute. Left 0, top 0, just to make sure it's in the right spot. So basically, when we look at this markup again, the container is the center aligned with the width 200, 300. And then this is position absolute to the left 0, top 0. and has width 100%, height 100%. And then both of these sides are also position absolute left 0 to top 0. So they're all hugging the left corner of their respective parents. So we're making sure that the width and height is the exact same, the left and right, where it's pinned is exactly the same. So the back is still sitting on top of the front. And the reason why we see the back and not the front is because browsers render HTML elements in order. So it renders the front first, and then it renders the back on top of that because it's second. So it doesn't actually matter for this experiment which order they're in. The effect will be the exact same. Okay, so you'll probably think, yeah, when we load the page and we see this this hover card and we see the back, that's probably wrong. We don't want the back to show up right away. So what we want to do is we want to actually flip this around and turn on a CSS 3D feature where it will not render elements where you can only see the backside of the element. And if that sounded confusing, hopefully it'll make a little more sense as I plug in what we need here. So for the side, or sorry, for back, first thing we need to do is we need to flip the back around. So the back side, we're gonna flip this around, just the back. We're gonna flip it around 180 degrees horizontally. So let me go ahead and do that. And to do that, use transform. So all CSS 3D takes place within transform. And you do rotate Y, and that'll be, the Y is for horizontal. So we could actually rotate it, vertically or otherwise. So, but Y is good for this. So we're just gonna do 180 degrees. Now it's gonna have a funny effect where this will actually reverse the image and the text here. Now it's all backwards because we flipped it around. And now we need to turn on the next CSS 3D property to learn. If you're not familiar with this, we need to turn on backface visibility hidden. So that's backface visibility hidden. There's really two real properties of backface visibility: visible and hidden. And it's visible by default, and we want hidden. So basically all backface visibility means is if you've got an element that's rotated around so that we only see the back of the element, then the browser's just not going to render it. And that's pretty much what we want. So because we flip this around 180 degrees, we're now actually looking at the back of the backside. And with backface visibility hidden, it should be hidden now because of that rule. So if I refresh, and it would help if I save this, but okay, if I refresh, now we see the front. The back is hidden because we're looking at the back of that element. So the browser's like, oh, you can only see the back, so I'm gonna hide that element from you now. So that's cool. So now we see the front, and we pretty much got our playing card now. So the back is actually sort of tacked onto the back of this front. Saying back and front a lot here, but hopefully it's not too confusing. And so all we need now is just to be able to flip it around. And the coolest way to do that is, it may seem intuitive to try to put a hover pseudoclass on the sides. Do not do that, and I'll show you why in a little bit, but you want to do it on the container. It's actually mostly the whole reason this inner container is here is to hold the hover pseudoclass, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So inner container hover, and that's, if you're not familiar with pseudoclasses, the hover is a pseudoclass. Pretty much anything after a colon and a selector is a pseudoclass. So this will take place anytime your mouse cursor's over inner container. And actually, I'm going to put a border. Make it green. I don't think I have any other green colored things in there. So if I save, refresh, I can't really see it. Let me make this 3. Save, refresh. You still really can't see it, but there's a there's a thin little green border here. I'm not gonna fool with this anymore, but anyway, save. So when you hover over this, we're putting the hover element on this container div. And now what we want to do is we want to say, okay, when I hover over this, I want to rotate our playing card. I want to rotate everything inside of this element horizontally by 180 degrees. So just kind of like how we rotated the backside 180 degrees. To flip the card over, now we got to do that same thing for the whole thing. And so this will stay 180 degrees. And so we do that by transform. Same thing we did for the backside. Rotate Y 180 degrees. Save. All right, now this is not going to work, and I'll show you exactly why until we add a couple of extra rules. So I hit refresh. If I hover over it, whoa, what happened? Now it's just saying this is the front. Okay, so basically what's happening, it looks a little funny that way. When I hover over it, flips around. So what happened here is actually we're seeing the rendered faces in inner container flipped over 180 degrees, but it's not taking into account any of the 3D stuff we added here. So to do that, we need a rule called transform style preserve 3D. Style preserve 3D refresh. Now when I hover over it, we see the back side, because preserve 3D is preserving the 3D of the child elements. It's basically treating as all one 3D space instead of two separate 3D spaces. And so pretty much all we need now. So if I hover over it, yeah, we see the backside. That's cool and all, but it's not a very 3D effect, right? It's not that impressive. I mean, you could accomplish the same thing without 3D. You could just, put two divs and make one display blocked and the other display hidden. But so now we're actually going to add the thing that gives us the visual coolness of flipping the card over. And we do that with a good old-fashioned CSS 3 transition. Keys out. So modern browsers are really cool in the fact that they can take one 3D rotation or transition or translate and morph it, animate it to another smoothly. And we're just going to do that with a straight transition. Don't even need animate or anything like that, which is more complicated. So transition is all we need here. And if I saved it, if I refresh, now when I hover over it, boom, we got our flippy card. Isn't that cool? I made it 2 seconds so you can see the effect really nicely. But if you want to make it, on a more professional site, you probably want to make it a lot faster so the user doesn't have to wait for it to turn around. And okay, so this is a pretty common gotcha. So hover is working as expected. When I hover over this, it's flipping around. But here's the problem. Do you see the sort of glitchiness, how it's sort of flashing around a little bit as I'm clicking on it, or as I'm hovering over it, I should say. That is because the hover element is on the container of this playing card. It's on the playing card itself. So when my mouse is off the edge like this, as it rotates, there's a points at which where my mouse cursor is no longer hovering over it because it's animated away from underneath my mouse cursor. And sometimes that happens fast enough where the browser doesn't respond in time and it's able to complete the transition, but that's why it's all sort of glitchy like that. So what we want to do is we want to actually take this outer container, that container, we want to put the hover on that and then tell it to rotate the inner container. So for this particular rule, we got the hover right, and we got the transform on inner container right, but the hover is just on the wrong element. So we just need to put the hover on the container and make that say, okay, apply this to inner container when you hover over it. So I'm just gonna take that off and go in front of this and go container, hover, inner container. So with that in place, when I refresh, now it's smooth. When I hover over it, it's really smooth, really nice. There's no glitchiness whatsoever. And the reason for that is, let's put border on solid green. Let me go ahead and do box sizing border box, so that the border will appear outside the width and height. So now you see the green. So the hover here is taking effect anytime I enter the green box, whereas before the green box would move with the flip card. So as it animated away from underneath my mouse cursor, the hover event would hover out and it would try to revert itself back to the way it was. So yeah, that's pretty much the flippy card experiment. That's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this particular video. I hope you liked it and hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment or ask me, or find me on Twitter at PeteMilkman. And yeah. All right, thanks for watching.